Good morning and afternoon and evening to our global attendees. I would like to thank all of you for joining today's dialogue during International Development Week 2021 and very much looking forward to an engaging discussion. My name is Abbas Sumar and I'm the president of the Canadian Association for International Development Professionals. CAIDP, as we're more commonly known, is a national nonpartisan membership association established in 1993 and today serving as the voice of Canada's international development community. We represent the full spectrum of development professionals from academia and across the private, public, and not-for-profit sectors. We come together to foster excellence, promote collective interest, and enable thought leadership on critical issues such as our discussion today. I encourage all of you to join CAIDP as members alongside more than 140 organizational and individual change makers. I am joined today by an esteemed colleague, Murwarid Zirai of Canadian Women for Women in Afghanistan as my counterpart this morning. We're excited to turn our attention back to Afghanistan, focusing on Canada's engagement in the peace and reconciliation process and the future outlook for peace, stability, and development in Afghanistan. In that vein, we are privileged to have an incredibly diverse and experienced group of panelists representing Canadian and Afghan perspectives, and each a market maker in their own right. I would also like to thank Professor Nipa Banerjee of the University of Ottawa for bringing this important issue back to the forefront and for working with us on today's discussion, which is live and on the record. We invite the audience to contribute questions and comments through the question feature embedded within the control panel. And at this point, I would like to invite my colleague Murwarid to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you, Abbas. Salam. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone from wherever you are joining us today. My name is Murwarid Zirai. I am the Senior Director with Canadian Women for Women in Afghanistan. Canadian Women for Women in Afghanistan today plans, delivers, and educational programs for women and girls in Afghanistan. But actually, we were born as an advocacy movement when individuals from across Canada joined together with the united idea that human rights of women and girls are non-negotiable. And today we have resumed our advocacy work again as we work to amplify the voices of women in Afghanistan and also their demands that their rights to be protected in the context of Afghan peace process. Abbas, would you like me to go on with the introduction of the panelists?
That would be wonderful, please.
Okay, it's a privilege to introduce today's moderator and also three distinguished guest speakers. We are thrilled to have them with us in this event. Our first speaker is Ms. Fawzia Kofi, a member of Peace Negotiation Team representing Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. Besides her political activism, Ms. Kofi is a human rights and women's rights activist, an advocate for girls' education, and have made numerous achievements in passing legislations in support of women in Afghanistan when she was a member of Parliament. She has recently been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, which is a tremendous achievement. Congratulations, Ms. Kofi. Our second panelist is Ms. Narges Nehan, former Acting Minister of Mines, Petroleum and Industry, Ministry of Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, who is titled Iron Women of Kabul by Bloomberg in 2019. She has dedicated her life to developing Afghanistan by empowering women and youth. Ms. Nehan is an advocate for inclusive and sustainable peace while working with public and private sectors for women economic empowerment. And our last but not least panelist is Mr. Christopher Gibbons, Executive Director, Afghanistan and Pakistan at Global Affairs Canada, who has numerous Afghanistan assignments under his belt, besides a wealth of experience in the broader region, including in India, and leading Canada's response to earthquake in 2015. He has also previously worked with the Department of Canadian Heritage, the National Film Board Canada, and the Private Council Office Foreign Secretariat. Finally, I would like to add that one of our panelists, Dr. Orzala Nemat, was unable to join us at the last moment. So our apology that she's not with us here today. But I think you will all agree we have a wonderful, highly engaged panel who will make our time together count. And today's moderator is Mr. Michael Pedro, a historian, a journalist, and an award-winning author who has served wars and conflicts across Africa, the Middle East, and Asia, including Afghanistan since 21. He is currently the editor-in-chief of Open Canada, an online magazine about Canada's place in the world, published by Canadian International Council. We are thrilled you are moderating this panel, and in fact, the floor is yours, Michael. Over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Ayu. Thank you for your kind words. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you to all the guests that we have listening to us today. I'm very pleased that we're able to have this conversation now. I think it's an auspicious moment for Afghanistan. It's almost 20 years of an intensive international involvement in the country in a variety of facets. And we're also in the process of peace negotiations, which certainly 20 years ago perhaps seemed far off. And I'm very keen to hear, especially Ms. Kufi talked about that. And I am looking forward to the insights that Ms. Nahan and Mr. Gibbons will give as well. Ms. Kufi, but I think we'd like you to start off if you can. And you, of course, are deeply involved in these negotiations, and I've been following some of your discussions about them for years. So I'm quite eager to hear what you can tell us, and I think the other guests on the call would be as well. So if I can turn it over to you, I'm keen to hear what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I also thank the organizers for this timely exchange of views on the matters of important relevance to Afghanistan, especially on peace and security. Something that I'm sure we all agree that people of Afghanistan deserve now, after 4 decades of war, to have a peaceful life. And only people who have lived in Afghanistan and people who continue to live in Afghanistan will understand the burden of 4 decades of killing and bloodshed. So it is the time for us to put our efforts and our time and our energy together to bring a sustainable, long-lasting, just peace in Afghanistan. But before that, I would like to thank the Canadian government and the Canadian people for their very generous support throughout the years. I must say that Canada is one of those countries that across Afghanistan it's loved and respected for their support in girls' education, women's empowerment. We have benefited the timely statements and political support of your political representation in Kabul in terms of trying to express the demand of people for ceasefire and ending the bloodshed. When it comes to the talks, I would like to start by stating what are the opportunities for peace now in Afghanistan. And then I will also touch upon the challenges and hopefully the way forward. The opportunities for peace in Afghanistan right now is, first of all, a political consensus nationally. 5 years or 6 years back, there were political groups, there were leaders, politicians who had the idea that talks with Taliban will put their interest at risk, and therefore they were opposing peace negotiations with Taliban and believed that the Taliban could be defeated militarily. Now, across Afghanistan, I mean, among the political community of Afghanistan, there is the understanding that there is no way out but negotiation and trying to resolve our differences and disputes through talks. There is somehow a regional consensus also. Although it's a very conflicting region, Afghanistan's geographical location is unfortunately in a situation that makes it a kind of a proxy battlefield between different immediate and far neighbors. But when it comes to the need for peace, not only for the sake of peace, but also for our neighboring and regional countries to benefit economically also from a peaceful Afghanistan, there is a level of consensus to support and engage in a peaceful and peace process Afghanistan, a peaceful Afghanistan and the peace process. The third is the international consensus. We understand now there is a new administration in the United States, which is in the process of review of its agreement and coming up with a new probably strategy. What we hope is that in this process of review, hopefully the peace process, the shortcomings will be reviewed and efforts will be put in place to address the shortcomings. There were certain things that are shortcomings and certain things that could have been done better. One of the things that could have been done better initially was when the talks with Taliban started 3 years back. I think that was important that at the same time, United States could engage with the Republic of Afghanistan, with people of Afghanistan, with politicians, with political community and the government of Afghanistan, engage at the same time, because that would have put both sides at the kind of equal position. Because what I believe right now, and I think, and my understanding of meeting and negotiating with Taliban now for over 2 years, that Taliban, after their agreement with United States, they have a position, it has empowered their position, not only politically, but they have this feeling that after withdrawal of international forces, 31st of April, as agreed in the Doha agreement, they probably will come back militarily, or they will win in the negotiation table. So these are, I must say, these are the opportunities for the process. The challenges are that, first of all, the sincerity and genuinity of the other side. You know that the negotiations started on the 12th of September. There was a great amount of hope and expectation in the process back home, but also globally. A lot of people thought that this might end this more than 4 decades of war. However, in the first 3 months, we were basically engaged in talking how to talk on the finalizing rules of procedures. And our understanding was the rules of procedure is a matter of technical. However, from Taliban side, some issues of substance, issues of the future concerns of the people of Afghanistan were also raised, including like matters, for instance, that the negotiations should continue on the basis of Hanafi Islamic jurisprudence, which is something, of course, a common religion in Afghanistan. However, we thought from the Islamic Republic side that already we're starting to exclude one part of the society which believe in a different jurisprudence or school of thought. And then there were other matters that were issues of substance that came up in the first 3 months of the negotiations. Then we agreed to finalize the rules of procedures, and we agreed for a 20 days of pause and break to further consult. There was an agenda that was a draft agenda that was shared from the other side with us, 24 points for discussion. We also presented 28 items for discussions as an agenda item to the other side, to Taliban. And then we agreed that we will go for a break. Once we came back, we will start discussion on what matter to be first discussed. From our side, from the Republic side, our first item for discussion was ceasefire, because the peace process needs to be relevant to the people's life and make a difference and make an impact. Every day we all know, and you know, Michael, and all of us know that people in Afghanistan lose lives, and especially lately, the targeted assassinations of prominent women and human rights activists, journalists, with the fact that no one is taking responsibility, is creating a new atmosphere of fear and concern in Afghanistan. So our first item for discussion was ceasefire. From Taliban side was a discussion on the Islamic structure of a future political participation. Now we know that different Islamic countries, including countries in the region and the country which is the host of the peace talks, they have different structure of Islamic government. There is no defined structure for the Islamic government anywhere in the world. Different Islamic countries decide on how to rule. But we wanted to hear from Taliban and see what is their definition. However, after we came back from the pause, from the consultations, the Taliban had few meetings with them. We had few meetings with them, and then they did not come to the negotiations. We are in the negotiation side, and we are expecting them to engage. I think they're waiting for the United States to review its policy and strategy towards Afghanistan. But as somebody who lived in Afghanistan all my life, and as somebody who knew what are how much suffering the nation is undergoing, I think we have to really engage and sort out our issues, regardless of what United States policy or the rest of the world policy towards Afghanistan will be. And my hope is that the review will not actually result in the process to die, but rather to improve and strengthen where it needs to be strengthened. So the challenge right now is, first of all, genuinity and sincerity of the other side of the negotiation, and certainly also the region. I mean, yes, the region, it's an opportunity, but yet it's a challenge. With latest Taliban's travel to Iran, Turkmenistan, Russia, and some other countries, we are worried that once again Afghanistan will become a conflicting interest of these different countries in the region. We hope that moving forward, the shortcomings of the process will be improved, and we hope that the Afghans who have a history and culture of agreeing on things of huge difference with each other will basically and finally get engaged with each other and agree on a political settlement that will pave the way for inclusion of all sides, including Taliban, political community of Afghanistan, the women who have had, of course, a different experience during Taliban. We hope that the current momentum will be used and the opportunity is seized for ending this war. With that, I would like to end my intervention, Michael, and if there are, I would love to get engaged with questions and future intervention during the course of our session.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ms. Kufi. And we have, I encourage people in the audience to submit their written questions, and we're going to have a session afterwards, a more fulsome discussion. But I'm wondering if, just before we move on, if I could ask you, it's a bit of a personal question, but I think it has resonance for all of Afghanistan as well. 10 years ago, when I was in Afghanistan reporting, and I had a brief meeting with you, and we talked about the prospects of peace. And I mean, you told me then that there were some compromises that Afghans wouldn't accept. That a deal with the Taliban that compromised, on women's rights, education, perhaps, that even if that deal is struck at the negotiation table, that there are many Afghans, they would not accept that. They would return to the hills, I think, as you put it. So I guess, and of course, you've been a champion for women's rights and human rights in Afghanistan, many of those rights that the Taliban have opposed. So I guess I'd like to ask you, what compromises do you think the Afghan government, and if I could, maybe you personally, think must be made, and what concessions or compromises are beyond discussion, are red lines that you will not concede in any negotiations with the Taliban? Do you mind talking a little bit about that just before we move on?
Absolutely. No, I of course remember our brief meeting in Kabul, and I must say that both of us have not really changed much. Even COVID did not change us. Anyways, in terms of the compromise, I think anywhere in the world, the politicians try to put if not 100%, to some extent, what their community and their people want in a priority. If you travel in Afghanistan right now, in a context of, sociology and understanding of people's demand. True that people are losing life, and true that it has become so brutal, especially that nobody takes responsibility and it's a no one's responsibility war. All of this is true. But it's also true that regardless of which province, where in Afghanistan you travel, from south to east, north to west, nobody wants to return to the time of Taliban when it comes to exercising some of those liberties that you have mentioned, including women's right to political participation, women's rights to education, women's rights to access basic rights. And also, I mean, it has not been, the Taliban government has been very marginalized when they were in power in that rules and policies that they have imposed on women. Nowhere in the Muslim world, if you look at, for instance, the same country that I'm talking to you right now, Qatar, there is a number of women in education and higher education institutions are more than the main. This is an emirate country, like a country which has an emir, an Islamic country. You look at Pakistan, for instance, look at Iran. I mean, probably we don't like them in many sense, but in terms of their education and allowing their women to exercise their rights, Indonesia, Malaysia, other Muslim countries, I mean, our relationship with their governments is a different thing. I'm not talking politically. From a social point of view, they have had, the privilege of using the woman's capacity, woman's power, and woman's knowledge and woman's wisdom in their society. So it will be, I think it will be unfair to take women of Afghanistan or the society to 20 years back, because we cannot simply do that, Michael. Simply we cannot do it, because the society has transformed and moved so forward. For us to take it back to where we started from scratch is not possible. So therefore, I think there are things that the Taliban should realize that they cannot impose on people. They cannot impose to bring a government that does not respect the people's voice, that there is no democracy, that there is no people's participation. They cannot, the Taliban or no other political groups can afford to take women from their social political engagement back to the walls of their homes. They cannot do that, because now not only women that transform part of Afghan society will stand for this. And honestly, every day almost we have a consultation meeting with different people from Afghanistan, virtual meetings or face-to-face when we travel back home. I'm not only hearing from women, but also from men, that we will not tolerate to send our daughters back to home and deprive them from access to their rights. I give you one example. We had, I think it was a few days ago, we had a hearing, a consultation with people from across Afghanistan, 3 per province, so 100 people. There was a woman from, a student, I think, from Nimroz province. You know, Nimroz is in western part of Afghanistan, bordered with Iran. Relatively, culturally, not a very open province, however, a historic province. A girl from that province told me that, Ms. Kofi, my definition of peace is that after peace agreement, I have the opportunity to go to school and to have a job if I want to. And if you are not able to preserve that right for me, I am happy to risk my life of going to school under enormous attacks of suicide bombing or rocket or whatever, as a result of war I'm experiencing now, as to opposed to staying home and not enjoying my life. That is the definition of peace for many people in Afghanistan. And we are all committed. I mean, not easy, you know that the struggle we have for equity in Afghanistan is not only limited to Taliban's opposition, but also there are people within Afghan society, within the government, probably also in the negotiation team that will think differently. So our fight is basically triple than the fight of some of our male colleagues, because we have to represent the women of Afghanistan first. Second, we have to represent our constituents. And third, the interest of my country. So we have a double responsibility, triple responsibility. We hope that we will achieve this with the support of our international friends and the people of Afghanistan.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ms. Kufi. Is Ms. Nahan connected yet? If not, I'd be happy to move on to Mr. Gibbons.
No, she has
Mr.
not
Gibbons, do you mind?
connected.
Okay, so Mr. Gibbons, do you mind? We'll switch the order up a little bit, and can you present to us, please?
Of course. Well, thank you very much for that. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you. And it's an honor for me to be here and to be sharing the screen, so to speak, with Ms. Kufi and hopefully soon Ms. Nahan. And thank you for this opportunity. First of all, of course, thank you to the Canadian Association of International Development Professionals and the Canadian Women for Afghan Women for inviting Global Affairs and myself to speak today during International Development Week. I'm really pleased to be part of the discussion here today, to be able to highlight Canada's current objectives in Afghanistan, as well as what I believe to be some of the key milestones on the horizon that we're all facing in 2021. Before I dive into that, though, I would just like to acknowledge the remarkable dedication of international development practitioners in Afghanistan and, in fact, all over the world. International Development Week is a week to recognize the efforts and sacrifices of aid workers, volunteers, and partners who help make the world a better place. Afghanistan is certainly an extremely difficult operating environment, and many have paid the ultimate sacrifice to bring about development and stabilities. So to them, we are forever grateful. So moving on to the topic at hand in terms of development achievements. I think, while the purpose of today's discussion is to look forward, it is also important to take stock and acknowledge how far we have come. And certainly, Ms. Kufi spoke of that in response to your question, Michael, on some of those really fundamental things, that things really have changed. And it may look still very bleak to some on the outside, but really significant changes have taken place. Excuse me. As Canada's largest bilateral development program, that is to say Afghanistan is our largest bilateral development program, we've contributed more than 3.6 billion in development and humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan since 2001. Over the past 2 decades, Canada and members of the international community have worked with the government of Afghanistan to make fundamental changes. These include a significant expansion of primary education enrollment rates for girls, notable improvements in basic healthcare and immunization services, the formation and strengthening of state security forces, and the establishment of democratic institutions, many of which, as I say, Ms. Kufi spoke to just a moment ago. In achieving these objectives, Canada has always placed inclusivity at the heart of our work. Today, our support is aligned with and shaped by our feminist international assistance policy. This policy fundamentally recognizes that supporting gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls is the best way to build a more peaceful, inclusive, and prosperous world. And while historically Canada's development track record is strong, our current support comes at an important juncture for the government of Afghanistan and its people. It is a pivotal time, as you've mentioned, Michael, in Afghanistan's history, and we believe it is pertinent that we continue to work with the international community to reinforce our support and safeguard the important development gains we have made. So our Canada's current development programming in Afghanistan covers 3 main areas: health and education, women and girls' rights and empowerment, and peace and security. In education, we are supporting Afghanistan's efforts to address the challenge of out-of-school children by improving access to safe, quality, basic education, particularly for girls, and especially in vulnerable communities affected by conflict. In health, we support improvements to health service delivery, strengthened health systems, community engagement, polio immunization, and improved women's nutrition and health. This work places special importance on maternal, newborn, and child health, as well as sexual and reproductive health and rights. In the area of women and girls' rights and empowerment, we are supporting women's economic empowerment with the goal of advancing their agency and enabling them to become meaningful decision makers within their families and communities. And it sounds like that's very much aligned, Ms. Kufi, with the young women you're speaking to in Nimbus. We're also providing survivors of gender-based violence with psychosocial support and improved access to justice. This includes supporting the implementation and enforcement of the elimination of violence against women law. In peace and security, we continue to align our commitments with Canada's National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security, and to support NATO's Afghan National Army Trust Fund and the UNDP's Law and Order Trust Fund. Among other things, our support contributes to incorporating gender equality, training within the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces, and the inclusion of women in the security sector and in peace-building efforts. Together, programming in these sectors allows Canada to meaningfully contribute to Afghanistan's overall development objectives, while simultaneously targeting support to vulnerable and at-risk groups in an effort to ensure no one is left behind. While we are committed to staying the course on these important areas of work, we continue our support is fit for purpose. In that regard, I think there are perhaps 4 notable milestones for donors in Afghanistan as we enter 2021. The first is COVID-19, which is compounding a protracted crisis. The second is the ongoing peace negotiations. The third is Canada's new funding commitments. And the fourth is implementing recommendations that stem from an evaluation that was just undertaken of Canada's development assistance in Afghanistan, and I'll speak to each of those. So like most developing countries, the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated many of the challenges that Afghanistan already faced. With limited access to healthcare and water and sanitation, extensive food insecurity, high rates of malnutrition, ongoing humanitarian needs, and growing poverty, the pandemic is causing an unprecedented crisis in an already fragile context. We know that the weak healthcare system is facing a potential breaking point. We also know that thousands of cases are likely undetected, contributing to further community spread as lockdown measures are ignored for very strong, obvious economic imperatives and pressures. Through our trusted development partners, including the World Bank and the UNDP, Canada is working alongside other donors to provide emergency support to thousands of households throughout communities in need. This includes increasing local food production and creating short-term employment opportunities, aiming to address both immediate and longer-term impacts of the pandemic. We're also providing emergency support to meet the medical needs of the affected Afghan National Police personnel, as well as ensuring they have adequate personal protective equipment. Additionally, Canada has worked together with partners to adjust operational development projects where possible to respond to COVID-19. For example, women's economic empowerment projects have shifted activities to have women sewing masks and other personal protective equipment. Lastly, we've contributed an additional 1.6 million to the Afghanistan Humanitarian Fund. This was in 2020 to help respond to COVID-19. And this was in addition to an already previously allocated 14 million, which had been allocated to address the broader humanitarian needs in Afghanistan. So another major recent development, of course, was the International Donors Pledging Conference, which was held virtually this past November. At that conference, our Minister of International Development, Minister Gould, announced an additional 270 million Canadian dollars in funding over the next 3 years, so taking us through to 2024, to support Afghanistan's path towards greater peace, stability, and development. The pledging conference came at a critical point in Afghanistan history, and we felt, therefore, that it was really important that Canada sent a clear message of support and solidarity to the government of Afghanistan and the Afghan people, hence not just the amount, but also the extension through to 2024, despite the very immediate challenges that we face. And precisely because of those challenges, and we've spoken to some of those and expand on that in terms of the peace process. So on the one hand, we were very committed to making that commitment for an extended period to send that very positive, strong signal. But at the same time, for the first time, our future funding, like that of many of our donors, have been made conditional on the preservation of human rights, including women's rights, as well as democratic institutions and anti-corruption reforms. Specifically, decisions to confirm Canada's continuation, modification, or suspension of support will be based on a review process that assesses adherence to these core principles. I think that in this we are aligned with the government of Afghanistan's determination to preserve the significant gains achieved over the past 20 years. Canadian officials are working and will continue to work diligently with fellow donors, as well as the government of Afghanistan, to determine the monitoring matrix. And we will all be convening towards the end of the year with the government of Afghanistan and donors to assess progress 1 year after that conference. In the context of our renewed funding commitment, we also know that Afghanistan development gains are inextricably tied to political and security developments, and of course, most notably, the peace process that we keep coming back to. Of course, Canada welcomes the current talks between the government of Afghanistan and the Taliban, and we seek to support these discussions where possible and appropriate. We recognize that the process will be very long and difficult, and as Ms. Kufi noted, the fact that it took almost 3 months for the parties to agree on a preliminary code of conduct indicates just how challenging this will be. But I think, I think for many of us, that doesn't come as a surprise after 20 years of conflict and violence. It's going to take a while for this process to settle. But we all obviously hope that that will indeed be the case. That being said, we are also very, very deeply concerned about the ongoing high levels of violence by the Taliban, including in particular in the relatively recent escalation of targeted assassinations against journalists, prosecutors, government officials, as well as civil and women's rights activists. We frequently join with our colleagues in the international community to condemn these horrific attacks. Since the outset of the negotiations, Canada has been vocal about the importance of an Afghan-led and owned process, and to continue to advocate very strongly for the voices of women, along with cultural and religious minorities, to be heard throughout this process. Specifically, in line with our feminist international assistance policy and Canada's National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security, Canada remains fully committed to supporting women's participation in the peace process, as we think it is a prerequisite for meaningful and lasting peace. It is critical that women are at the table, as is Ms. Kufi, visibly taking a leadership role. For women and girls, these negotiations have practical, tangible, and very immediate impacts. So if I may, Ms. Kufi, on behalf of the Government of Canada, I'd like to thank you for your really, really significant contribution and those of your colleagues, which we know comes at great risk to both to yourself and your family. For Canada's part, through our Peace and Security Operations Programming, we are supporting women's organizations to become more involved in local and national peace processes and equipping Afghan women with negotiating skills. We've also taken a leadership role on helping develop a better understanding of how Islamic jurisprudence can be used to precisely protect the democratic governance and human rights at the negotiations. This includes supporting a study by Canadian Islamic scholar Professor Iman in 2020, and we will continue to support his and his colleagues' work through a series of reports that we hope will get towards the end of March, and we hope will be of assistance to the negotiating team. Finally, if I may, in 2021, officials at Global Affairs Canada will be working to implement the recommendations of an evaluation, as I mentioned, that was undertaken of our development assistance program in Afghanistan. This is kind of a regular process that the department and the government has. Some of the key findings indicate that despite the very obvious challenges of delivering assistance in Afghanistan, the majority of Canadian projects met, and in some cases have exceeded their objectives. With regards to areas for improvement, we are in agreement with the recommendations and have developed a management response outlining our commitment to implementing actions to address them. Specifically, some of those recommendations include ensuring that where possible, future programming is even better tailored to Afghanistan's unique, complex, and evolving context. Developing a conflict sensitivity analysis, including a strategy to incorporate the drivers of conflict into program design and implementation. Developing and publishing an Afghanistan strategy to better to promote greater coherence and integration across the international assistance streams. Identifying ways to tailor messages to promote gender equality, programming that resonate more with the intended audiences in Afghanistan. Engaging men and boys more effectively to foster gender equality results and the empowerment of women and girls. And finally, continuing to work with other donors in urging NATO, the UNDP, and the World Bank to improve results-based management, accountability, and transparency in the administration of multi-donor trust funds in Afghanistan. So as I mentioned, we'll be working diligently to bring about those recommended changes. And in fact, it's very timely because, as I mentioned, there's that recent announcement of additional funds through to 2024. We're precisely in the process of beginning that planning for the next round of programming. So it's very timely. Finally, in conclusion, if I may, and thank you for once again for this opportunity, Canada is committed to helping Afghanistan reach its full potential. The region as a whole is the sum of its parts, and Afghanistan, located at the heart of Asia, is a significant part of that region. I believe peace within Afghanistan has the potential to unlock prosperity far beyond its own borders. As we look towards the future, now more than ever, the international community needs to demonstrate its support to the government and the people of Afghanistan as it enters this new period of change. Thank you again for allowing me to be here today. I think you may have noted I did spend a year in Afghanistan and have worked previously extensively within the Afghanistan team here in Ottawa. And so I've witnessed firsthand the contribution of aid workers and the contributions that they make towards achieving development gains. So once again, if I can just reiterate that your tireless devotion to countries such as Afghanistan further solidify your position as a pillar of the international development community. And with that, I will end and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gibbons. I have a couple questions for you. First, I hope, short and specific, and then maybe a broader one, which I'd love to hear Ms. Kufi answer as well. Just in terms of how Canada targets its funding, and you mentioned the priorities, and you also mentioned some funding is contingent on constitutional reforms, anti-corruption measures. Is democratization part of Canada's development assistance goals in Afghanistan? Are we active in civil society training, democratic development? Is that part of Canada's package of intervention in Afghanistan?
Yes, in a nutshell, definitely. There's sort of four main areas, and inclusive governance is one of them. So the others are, health, education, gender equality, empowerment, and peace and security. But one of the fourth is governance, and that's directly tied to some of those issues that I hinted at and what you're inquiring about.
Okay, can I ask you a broader question?
It's very, I can't hear you.
I think a lot of us who have been involved in the country feel emotionally attached to it. So I said, what are Canada's interests in Afghanistan? I said a lot of us may feel emotionally.
Yeah. Okay. So Michael, I'll say the one part I heard of that was Canada's interest in Afghanistan. So I'll speak to that. I think it's multi-layered. I mean, one is just a fundamental humanitarian. It's one of the most fragile, the most poor, the most disadvantaged countries in the world. And so Canada, as part of its international development assistance mission or commitment globally, obviously Afghanistan is going to feature front and center in terms of those thoughts and in terms of our planning and in terms of our funding prioritization. Secondly, I think it's no secret we all saw what happened and what can happen when a country such as Afghanistan, and in particular Afghanistan, does become a failed state. And I think it's in the country's interest, the region's interest, and our global interests not to see that happen. And a fundamental way of achieving that is precisely through developing through that development assistance and engagement, and developing education, and developing health, developing all those institutions, which, as Ms. Kufi has said, that there's a generation now that has grown up with some of that, far from what is actually needed, but with some of that. And there's a recognition that there's no going back. And so it's not just simply a question of having a military presence to prevent the spread of international terrorism, but it's setting the foundations of a society that can then build and prosper, which then undermines those very pressures. So perhaps I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you very much. Excuse me for walking around to get clear internet in the house. Ms. Kufi, do you want to touch on that question as well? I mean, why does your country, or why should your country matter to Canada? If you were to, I suppose, make the case to Canadians about why this is a worthwhile investment of their development assistance, why should Canadians care, to put it bluntly?
Well, before coming to the question, I would like to thank Christopher for a very comprehensive intervention, but also for your government's, once again, support to Afghanistan. I mean, I must say that you started working, and you know that, Michael, because you have been, I think, in Afghanistan when you had the provincial reconstruction team in Kandahar. Kandahar is a very difficult province. That was after the fall of Taliban, where you started your provincial reconstruction team and supporting women's empowerment, women's education by building schools. So those were difficult times. I mean, in terms of the institution and the system that was not so much established. Right now, I think why should international community continue to support Afghanistan? For two basic reasons. Firstly, if Afghanistan is once again abandoned, as it was in 1992, 1993, which paved the way for, and I can see you have an Afghan carpet in your wall as well. If Afghanistan is once again abandoned from support to inclusivity, support to good governance, support to the rule of law, support to democratic institutions, there is the risk that Afghanistan might once again fall into the hands of military extremism. Not only Taliban, but there are also other military extremist groups like Daesh. According to some reports, there are 22 military extremist groups that operate between Afghanistan, Pakistan, Central Asia, Uzbekistan, in this region. So they are not only a threat to the security of Afghanistan or to the security of Afghan people, eventually they can be a threat to your own security, no matter where you are. I mean, we sincerely hope that our Canadian friends will always enjoy peace and prosperity. But we know that the world experienced enormous challenge of security in 2001 from Afghanistan, or because of their abandonment of Afghanistan. So this is the first thing. The second thing is we need to listen to the people of Afghanistan. The people of Afghanistan deserved to be supported, deserved to have a better life, because we are living in a global village, which is called the world, for the cause of humanity, for the cause of sharing our common values and promoting the common values. You need to stay engaged in Afghanistan. And in fact, the donor conference of November for Afghanistan sent two messages to those who still think that Afghanistan will be abandoned and once again fall into the hands of extremism, and especially military extremism. Two strong messages. Afghanistan institutions, Afghanistan's demand, the people's demand for peace and prosperity, for living a better life, for inclusivity, for supporting its women, will be the priority of the world. And the second was the peace process in Afghanistan will be supported and hopefully will be made a successful case, because as I said before, there is no way out. We want to enjoy as much life as you people in the other parts of the world are living. We really want to, have basic rights to enjoy our life. And for that, I think we all have a common task of humanity to share with each other. We know that the Canadians do not have a specific political agenda, and that's why you're respected in Afghanistan, because you do not pursue a political agenda, but an agenda which actually serves the people of Afghanistan, an agenda that serves peace, democracy, rule of law, women empowerment, girls' education. All of that is for the cause of humanity. And if you close your doors to Afghanistan, can you imagine what catastrophe we'll once again face? Not in terms of the war and killing and the number of people that will lose life, but in terms of the migration, in terms of poverty, in terms of weak institutions that will collapse, result a collapse of the whole state. So therefore, I think the Canadian role is, because of having a only a humanitarian focus, is widely respected, and I hope that you will continue to support us, especially the women of Afghanistan, because it's only our international partners that we rely the most in this difficult battle and endeavors ahead of us.
Okay, thank you. Could I ask you a specific, Ms. Kufi, a specific development-related question? What sort of development assistance and investment is most needed and most useful for Afghanistan?
Well, in the context of what we do right now in terms of peace, and hopefully if we agree on a peace settlement, you know that there are 80,000, of course there is no accurate numbers, but people say there are 80,000 Taliban soldiers who will have to be reintegrated into the society in a way that they will not be once again a security challenge, but become a useful human being into the society. So I think post-peace agreement, there is enormous need for investing on creation of jobs, opportunities for those who are fighting, but for those who already suffer. And I think the second thing is, as I mentioned before, I think we need to, yes, we do appreciate your humanitarian aid. You have been supporting us under difficult circumstances. You have always been a reliable partner for Afghanistan. However, you know that Afghanistan has enormous economical resources, billions of dollars underground. We have natural resources. We have an important location that will connect Afghanistan to Central Asia and South Asia. So if you could, in long term, hopefully, invest also in terms of using the natural resources of Afghanistan to benefit the people of Afghanistan, I think that will be not only an aid partnership, but also a defined partnership between the two nations that will benefit both nations in terms of economic opportunities.
Thank you.
But of course, my core sorry, Michael, my core belief is, if you really want to empower a society, you need to empower the women of the society. 55% of people of Afghanistan are women, and they have proven that if they are given opportunity, they will grab and use it, and they will become a positive agent of change into their society. What you do for promoting women's education and empowerment, and working to promote reduce violence against women, training judges, training police officers, I know that you are doing all of this. That is something which will not be visible in short, because it's something that's not a school building you build, but you basically build a society. So I hope you will continue to support that to support us on that aspect.
Thank you. Could I ask you in a little bit more detail? You mentioned the need, or the coming need, hopefully, to reintegrate Taliban soldiers into Afghan society. I mean, that must be an enormous challenge beyond simply the job provision. How do you envision that happening, and is there ways that international partners, Canada specifically, might be able to help with that?
I think that will be a big task after we agree on a peace settlement or peace agreement. I think that will be the major task after agreeing on a political settlement, on how to make sure that we bring these fighters to a normal life, so that they don't become an easy recruit for other military extremist groups, including Daesh, because there is the risk that if these fighters who actually do not have education opportunity. They're not educated. The only thing they know, unfortunately, is how to use a weapon and how to kill human beings. They're brainwashed. To reintegrate them to the normal life is an enormously challenging process. We certainly need not only your technical expertise or the technical expertise of those countries who have gone through this or supported such initiatives, but also we need your financial support, because certainly somebody who holds a gun is able to, with Taliban, is able to earn $300-400 per month to bring them to a normal life and offer them 5,000 AFs, for instance, which is not even $100, is of course not something that will satisfy him to stay part of the peace and prosperity of Afghanistan. So they can be easy target for other military extremists. The solution would be long-term investment into the resources of Afghanistan to create jobs that are long-term solution for these people. And I think on that, your role and your support is extremely important.
Thank you. Mr. Gibbons, is there something you'd like to say and address regarding that question?
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity, and thank you very much, Ms. Kufi, for that feedback. I mean, I think this is precisely the dialogue that we are going to be launching into with the government of Afghanistan and through the Afghanistan partnership framework, as well as donors and partners, precisely scoping out this new. I don't think we can repeat what we have been doing because the situation is evolving. So the challenge will be, how do we maintain our continued support on health and education, where the needs will just remain so essential, yet at the same time engage on these new areas that would support a peace process or a peace outcome, whatever that may be. But I think that's, economic development, I think, is going to be key. And you're quite right, Ms. Kufi, in terms of the natural resources, the wealth that Afghanistan has, and there's a clear, how should we say, compatibility or overlap with Canada's experience and economic base is very much natural resource based. So there's a lot of expertise and a lot of interest here on that. So I think there's some opportunities that we really need to explore there that would then tie, precise as you say, to the ongoing sustainable economic development that's going to be necessary in the immediate, and I think the immediate is going to be the challenge. I recall years ago when I was in Afghanistan, there was a program where they were just trying to, give a cash payment to a Taliban fighter, and they would go into the base and they would hand in their weapon and they'd get some cash. And of course, that was, completely ineffective, no matter how well-intentioned that individual may have been. Once that cash is gone, then, they need a job. So it needs something much more thoughtful and much more considered. So that's what we're going to be, thinking through and working with you on that. So thank you for the opportunity.
Well, I have a question we have several questions from the audience that I'd like to bring into our discussion. One from Mohammed Kazlabash. What role, if any, should neighboring countries like Iran and Pakistan play in ensuring the peace process in Afghanistan is fulfilled, as the interests of the neighboring countries may not be in line with the interests of the current government and leadership of Afghanistan? Great question. I was wondering the same, and I'd love to hear what both of you might have to say about that. Ms. Kufi, would you like to go ahead first,
yes.
Perhaps?
The region has always been a conflicting region for many years now, and different countries have different conflicting interests in Afghanistan. And unfortunately, the country being a landlocked country makes it very difficult also. But in the meantime, there is an opportunity for the fact that if there is a peaceful Afghanistan, it will not only serve the political purpose of the region, but also economic purpose of the region. So a peaceful Afghanistan will easily connect Pakistan, for instance, with Central Asia, the countries that are full of natural resources. Or for instance, some of these big initiatives like TAPI or others who have started, only a peaceful Afghanistan will ensure that these big projects that are regional connectivity, connecting, for instance, Iran, Turkmenistan, India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan will only be possible through a peaceful Afghanistan. So I know that there are so many interconnectivity of what goes on in DC and how much that will impact the politics in the region. This is all interconnected. I know that there should be some level of flexibility. We have to gain and gate in peace process. There is a level of sacrifice needed, of course, to achieve peace. But in the meantime, I hope that through a robust diplomacy that lately we have started, our Ministry of Foreign Affairs started, we will be able to mobilize the region in terms of genuinely supporting the peace process and standing by the people's interest. But I must say, it's a very conflicting region, and it is a very difficult issue and yet sensitive. We know that the latest trips the Taliban leadership had to Iran and Russia and Turkmenistan and also Pakistan, unfortunately has hardened Taliban's position, I must say, in the negotiation table. So our hope is that these respected countries, immediate and far neighbors of Afghanistan, will support and become, agents of change in Afghanistan for a positive and peaceful change.
Okay, thank you. I have a question for you, Mr. Gibbons, although I'd be happy to hear from Ms. Kufi as well. And this speaks to my earlier question to Ms. Kufi about the necessary compromises, or perhaps the unacceptable compromises that Afghanistan may need to make, or maybe asks to make. And Mr. Gibbons, I know you said this process has to be Afghan-led, and I think I absolutely appreciate that. But Mariam Omar asks, she says, how can Canadian citizens help Afghans, but specifically Afghan women, to ensure that their rights are not compromised during the peace talks? How can we support and empower them? Mr. Gibbons, would you like to speak to that?
Certainly, thank you. Yeah, so I guess to go back to your point, absolutely, the process needs to be, Afghan-led. That being said, the international donors community did come together in the lead up to the donors conference, and there was a core group that did articulate some key elements that are going to be really monitored very, very closely, and that will, if challenged and threatened, we're going to have to really re-examine our contributions. And I don't think that is in any way meant as a threat, but I think it's just sort of awareness that both sides of the negotiating table realize that there are consequences, and obviously women's rights and the rights of women and girls are front and center within that. So we will be looking at the programming, and that's where, in terms of Canadian citizens supporting those Canadian efforts, in terms of how can we strengthen the programming that would strengthen women's empowerment, both in the immediate and the peace process itself. So there could be, for example, community-based projects, community-based, so sort of like from the bottom up, as Ms. Kufi has noted, things have changed, and across the countries, there's no desire for that return to the past. So how can we empower that voice? How can we help Afghans and Afghan women have a stronger voice there? So that's one element that we're going to be certainly looking at. Then in terms of, Canadian citizens and their support that they can provide, I think, we get already quite a number of letters from concerned citizens about the loss of rights and the loss of democratic institutions and women's rights, either addressed to the minister or the prime minister. And those are noted. And I think there's no harm in saying, look, we're fully supportive. Well, let's say I'd like to think as a Canadian citizen, you're supportive of our development engagement, but please, do everything you possibly can to ensure that those rights aren't diminished or those gains aren't compromised. Then that kind of loops in, if I may, Michael, to your earlier question about the region, and it's tied to broader diplomatic efforts that Canada is a part of and the international community really must maintain, both in terms of engagement with both sides of the negotiating table around those questions of rights, but also with the regional players. And they may not share the same concerns that we have around those questions of rights and democratic institutions, but they do collectively. I don't think any of those regional countries have an interest in Afghanistan becoming once again a safe haven for terrorism. So that is a bottom line. There's kind of an incentive there, and there's advocacy we can do and make in terms of the clear economic advantages to having a strong and stable Afghanistan. So I think there is room. I think there's an awareness that they just cannot carry on the way it has, and that everybody in the region is suffering as a consequence. Maybe I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Kupi, do you want to speak to that some more?
Briefly, when Taliban actually presented their agenda for discussion, as I said, 24 item, and of course there was an annex of Islamic to all of those agenda items, like Islamic structure, Islamic leadership, Islamic women's rights, prisoners, Islamic rights, etc. One of the things that the Taliban also put in the agenda was women rights according to the Islamic values and also national traditions. This is something they wanted to discuss. So this is something they put forward for discussion. And we all know that this peace process is probably the only process in the world where women's rights will be discussed. And discussed in a way that the two sides have very diverse understanding of, or different understanding of, Islamic values. Afghanistan has been an Islamic country. Our constitution is an Islamic constitution. If you ask the women of Afghanistan, no matter where they live, no woman in Afghanistan would like to live as a woman who lived in the West. But they would like to live is a life of dignity, a life that they will be able to continue education, to have access to resources, to have access to rule of law and justice if she needs, and be respected in the family, and not to be basic things. You know that in some parts of Afghanistan, it is still practiced that women are being given in exchange to blood dispute, to resolve a blood dispute, which has got nothing to do with Islam or religion. It's a cultural practice. So when Taliban say women rights according to Islam and also traditional practices, what does that mean? Of course, it sends a signal that we really have to be cautious and double cautious and keep an eye. And in terms of what Canadians can do, I think we are very much grateful, because there is a group of friends of Canada that are friends of Afghanistan that are established in Kabul. They issue timely statements in support of women, inclusivity and ceasefire. In fact, your ambassador also in Qatar has been extremely supportive of inclusivity and women participation. What we expect is continuing messages of support, solidarity, and ensuring that there is no peace in the cost of women's rights. Because once again, I shared the story of the woman from Nimruz. For most of us, the definition of peace is to continue our life as we do now. Because women of Afghanistan already, Michael, we do not have a luxury life. What should we give up? We are being target of killing and assassination, deprived of practicing our rights in the society to the extent that we deserve. Already, a systematic discrimination, access to economical resources still very low, domestic violence, etc. If you look at these figures, we are not enjoying a luxurious life. But what is the difference is that at least we can speak about our problems. During these times, at least we can speak about our problems. During Taliban, we were oppressed to the extent that we were not allowed even to speak about what we suffered from. So I think this is what people of Afghanistan want, to continue to have the liberty to speak and to exercise equality. And we need a solidarity of message, political support, of course, the commitments in terms of support to education, etc., that you have committed in November Geneva conference. These are enormous already, and we thank you for that.
Okay, thank you. I have a question from Aziza Azare, who identifies herself as an Afghan Canadian, and she says that she appreciates the stand that you've made on behalf of Afghan women, and says that this is something that cannot be compromised on in negotiations. And then she brings up a question which we haven't addressed yet, which is this. and it's for you, Ms. Kufi, what are some of the mechanisms you or the team from the government of Afghanistan is proposing to preserve the rights of minorities in terms of religious and ethnicity? For example, Hazaras, Ismailis. In these negotiations, we've talked a fair amount about gender and women's rights, but what about Afghanistan's ethnic and religious minorities? They I think have reason to be concerned as well. What are you doing to protect their rights?
They have a legitimate concern, and they have all the rights to be concerned, because we know that when Taliban were in power, many of these social and religious groups did not really have a good experience. And so therefore, what we do is, firstly, we have an inclusive team which represents not only, which is inclusive in terms of ethnic, gender, but also religious minorities. We have people from all walks of life. I mean, it would have been wonderful if we had more women in the negotiation table, because, as I said before, this is about women's rights. Basically, we are in the forefront of this fight. But we have religious minorities, and we have developed lately an inclusivity strategy, which is about how to ensure that during the talks, inclusion is respected. Diversity of Afghanistan is respected. We have to really, agree to coexist. This is something the Taliban should agree. This is something I have been, during the negotiation, my point of view that, like, you could have a different view, like many of us have different view, but let us live with our views. Don't kill us because we have a different view. Let us live, and you live in your parts of the country, we live in our parts of the country. It's a matter of coexistence. So what we have done is, first of all, we ensured that there is an inclusive team, representative of people from across walks of life, including religious minorities. And then we have developed a mechanism or a strategy that is for inclusion and inclusivity and respecting the diversity. And to be honest, this is one of those red lines you mentioned about, because it's mentioned in our constitution that Afghanistan's political, social, ethnic, religious diversity will be respected. And this is something we will not bargain. We will not put it for discussion, because otherwise, already, if one small part of the society feels excluded in this process, the process is not going to succeed. So I think it's also for the interest of Taliban. And finally, actually, during discussion on the code of conduct, they have agreed that they will mention both Hanafi and Jafari Islamic jurisprudence after a lot of resistance and struggle from our side. So it is not about who is Shia or who is Sunni. We all feel that we need to represent Afghanistan.
Okay, thank you. I have a question. This may be getting a little bit ahead of negotiations. This is from Anayat Adel, who asks, what is a realistic solution to the end of the conflict? Is it an interim regime, a transitional government, or is a final solution a power sharing arrangement with the Taliban? What do you think?
I mean, any peace process will result in a political settlement, but which will make all sides happy and all sides see themselves. I think only through negotiations we can agree on what will a political structure look like, where Taliban, the government, the political community, the women, the civil society, everybody will see themselves. We will have to talk about this during the negotiations. I do not have anything pre-designed in my mind, and I don't think it's appropriate for us to have already something pre-designed before we even know what the other side wants. Yes, I know lately Taliban spoke about an interim government in Moscow, etc. I think instead of talking in these different countries, they have to really talk to us about what they want the solution would be. But I know that there is a level of sacrifice and compromise that one has to make. Probably that will include Taliban, that will include people in Kabul, that will include politicians. We need to really be flexible in this process.
Okay, thank you. I have a question about the role of China, which is who country is becoming increasingly involved all over the world, but specifically in Afghanistan. How do you see their role impacting Afghanistan's future in the next few years? That's from our audience. Would either of you like to speak on that? Well, I'm curious if this is something, if there's a relationship Canada might have, but I guess primarily I think the question is to you, Ms. Kufi. Is that something that you can speak to?
Yeah, well, I mean, China is a new reality for Afghanistan. I mean, we share border with China. Our expectation is that Chinese, like I have asked, your country in terms of investing in helping Afghanistan with its natural resources, China can also play an important role in terms of investing in Afghanistan in terms of natural resources. However, once again, I must say that with their in-depth relations with our neighbors, some of our neighboring countries, I see that the Chinese interest is, if choose between Afghanistan and Pakistan, probably they will choose Pakistan over Afghanistan. But what we hope is it's an unpredictable neighbor. We cannot predict them, neither we can avoid them. We are really hoping for a engagement in the part of economy, because this is a country that can help Afghanistan in many ways in terms of economic support.
Okay. Mr. Gibbons, anything you'd like to say about that? Is there kind of a relationship with Canada and China that impacts Afghanistan at all, or no?
No, I don't think directly, and I don't know that there's a lot to add to that. I think the one caution is, on the one hand, yes, there's great potential for economic development, but I think we've seen in other countries where that can come with some very strong strings attached, and countries find themselves rather caught by that. And so I think there's that, getting that balance is going to be a challenge for Afghanistan, to get that balance where there's definitely investment in infrastructure and so on that is needed and would be welcome, but Afghanistan would want to retain the control of those infrastructures. So,
thank you. What I'd like to do now is perhaps hand it back over to each of you to make some closing remarks. If there are things that we haven't touched on that you feel are important to bring up, if there's a message you'd like to leave the audience attendance with, I'd maybe invite you to make that now. Mr. Gibbons, do you want to start off?
Certainly. Well, thank you very much once again, Michael, for coordinating all of this, and for all of those who are taking part, and to Ms. Kufi for her thoughts and wisdom on this, which it's really great for me to be able to listen to and hear. I maybe very specifically just picking on a point that Ms. Kufi mentioned, and I thank her for flagging that, and I should have really, is the role that our ambassador in Qatar is playing. She's been super engaged on precisely helping to bring women together just for an informal platform for an exchanging of views, and that's been an indication, I think, of a kind of a role that Canada can play. And then there's also the Group of Friends of Afghanistan in New York at the United Nations that Canada chairs and meets quite regularly, and brings all those who are interested for sharing of information, discussions, policy, and otherwise. So I think there's a number of platforms that Canada plays a role in, and we need to look at how we can expand that going forward, and to support the government of Afghanistan and its efforts. So that in a way segues, I think, to wrap up our comments. I think Canada remains deeply committed for the reasons that we've articulated and discussed here. We're also in that really critical phase of looking at planning for our next round of programming, and so discussions such as these are invaluable for assisting our thinking and engagement on that. And we look forward to many more direct conversations with Ms. Kufi and the government of Afghanistan and our partners to support both the peace process, then the outcomes of whatever that peace process might be, and then the broader needs. So certainly lots and lots to talk about. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you. Before I just turn over to you, Ms. Kufi, perhaps I could just ask you both one final question, and that's regarding the role of Canadian development professionals. Is there a specific role that you think development professionals can play? We talked a lot about the role of Canadian governments. Can you speak to that and the sort of impact that they might have, that you would like to see them have? Is there something you can share about that?
Actually, Michael, I have seen some of these professionals who are expert on development worked in extremely difficult situations in Afghanistan, which was not security-wise safe. Some of the colleagues, including Professor Nipa Banerjee, who actually worked in Afghanistan, and yourself, who have reported from Afghanistan, all of these experts in a way that have been engaged. So I think your role, especially post-peace agreement, where our institutions need to be strong enough to preserve our rights, because I think, once again, most of the things we discussed, our strategy is not to discuss them with details in the negotiation table, because in the negotiation table, things can be very fragile. We would like to discuss some and agree and move forward on some of these issues, especially about women role, education, etc., and like the integration of Taliban fighters. Once we are, once we agree on a political settlement and we establish institutions and commissions, so the commissions are strong enough to hold back, collapse of some of these rights. And so therefore, I think the role of the development professionals is important and crucial in supporting Afghanistan. I don't want to use this term of reconstruction, because we have been in reconstruction phase for the past 20 years, but certainly we will once again be in the phase of reconstruction after a peace agreement. So I hope that you will continue to engage in Afghanistan now and post-peace agreement. And the final word would be, once again, we are at the peak of another experiment of history. Are we going to succeed, or are we going to fall? From an international perspective, I think there is no double standard. I think people, I'm sure, as you have been saying, people in the West or in Canada, they cannot just turn their face and say, well, let the Afghans to decide about their future, be it an Islamic Emirate or women at home. It's for Afghans to decide. There is no double standard on that. If your people deserve a society that everybody is respected, that women are, have the liberty to enjoy their life, that people, one individual, one vote, these are universal principles. And our hope is that you will continue, as you have been doing so for the past 20 years, to support these values and stand by people of Afghanistan in preserving and protecting these values in these extremely challenging times. Because I know that a lot of countries will say it's for Afghans to decide. I respect Afghan-owned and Afghan-led process, and this is something we have been vowing for. But in the meantime, I know that if the international community does not stand by common values, there is a risk of Afghanistan falling back, both in terms of the values and institutions, but also in terms of falling back to the hands of extremism. This is something we don't want. We don't want it for the people of Afghanistan. We don't want it for the women of Afghanistan. We don't want it also for the sake of our own people, your own people in your own country. We have a common home, a common room. It's called the world. In this room, people have different views, but they have the right to live with their views.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gibbons, are you anything you'd like to add, or?
That covers the ground pretty well, I have to say. Maybe I'll just say that, just really fundamentally to your question, Michael, I don't know how to say it without a sound like a platitude, but the work and the contribution and the thoughts and the expertise of development professionals are just fundamental to effective implementation. And so we work extremely closely with the implementing partners. I mean, I think if as a donor, one just simply threw money at something, then it would be, counter-effective. And that the only way it can be effective is by having those the knowledge that those development practitioners and professionals bring to the question and the discussion. So, yeah, essential.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gibbons. Ms. Kupi, thank you so much. Thank you both. This has been an illuminating conversation for me, and I think for our audience members. I'm grateful to have been a part of it. And my role now is to turn it over to Abbas Samar. Thank you both, and I think Abbas, you have some concluding remarks. Yes.
Thanks very much, Michael.
I believe you're muted.
Anybody ever able to hear me at this point? Excellent. So I'll invite my colleague Murward to kick it off, and I'll close it out in a moment.
Yeah, I must say it was a rich discussions, and I would like to express our deep gratitude to the panelists, Mr. Gibbons and also Ms. Kofi. Mr. Gibbons for renewing Canada's support to Afghan women through development work, and Ms. Kofi for reminding us why Afghanistan should matter to the world. And honestly, we are so lucky to have you representing Afghan women and Afghan people in the negotiation table. We are sorry that Ms. Nargis Nahan couldn't join us as she got some technical problem from where she was trying to connect with us. But with having Ms. Kofi here and having her thoughts on development issues, I think we covered that part perfectly well. And I would also like to thank Michael for doing such a fine job moderating this event. It's a timely discussion, I think, and we must continue these discussions. This is the situation that unfolds day by day, and we at Canadian Women for All Afghanistan believe that this is the time that Canadians' voices should be more loud and more engaged. We hope there will be more such kind of forums in the future. And I just want to share two immediate opportunities with you all here. We are co-hosting two other events during the United Nations NGO Commission on the Status of Women. It's a virtual parallel event. One is an event co-hosted with the Feminist Majority Foundation on March 23rd, called Sheikha Alia Ahmad bin Saif Al Thani. And the other is an event co-hosted with women living under Muslim law on March 26th, moderated by Qatar UN Ambassador. So to find more information, please check our event calendar online, and we would like to have you all there. Finally, I would like to say that these discussions are vital at this point, especially the time that Taliban are leveraging violence, and as Ms. Kofi said, and especially with target killings, to negotiate peace. And in the eyes of myself as an Afghan and many other Afghans, the peace that takes more lives and rights, and especially rights to education, doesn't mean a peace for us. We need the world's eye on Afghanistan. Thank you so much for your interest in this dialogue and joining all of us in today's session. I hand it over now to Abbas.
Perfect. Thank you very much. On behalf of the Canadian Association for International Development Professionals, we very much appreciate the approach each of you has taken to fostering dialogue today, and we'd like to thank each of you for your insight, analysis, and passion for sustainable peace and stability in Afghanistan. To our participants, I would like to let you know that CAIDP will work with the panelists to address some, if not all, of the outstanding questions from today. We very much appreciate the time you took to put them forward, and which will be made available on the CAIDP website alongside a recording of this panel discussion. I would say anticipate seeing that within about a week or so. Also, for those interested in continuing the conversation, the University of Ottawa will be holding a panel discussion on Monday, February the 22nd at 9 a.m. to 11:15 a.m. entitled The Peace Process in Afghanistan, Public Perceptions and Civil Society Views. My sense is that it will be another fantastic way to delve deeper into some of the core issues. In closing, I would like to thank all of our participants for attending and engaging today. CAIDP will continue to bring relevant pressing concerns within global development to platforms like this. So do continue to visit the website to keep abreast of the latest developments across the sector, and also consider joining CAIDP. So with that, thank you. Have a great day and stay safe, everybody.
Great. Thank you very much.
Bye.